up till now, and including Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and all the buccaneers who are doing the new space projects, all rockets that leave the Earth are powered by chemical reactions. They're big, they're powerful, they're great, they have limits, they weigh a lot for the kind of power they have, and they can only get so much up in orbit at one time, unless you ask Elon Musk, who just keeps thinking he'll make them bigger and bigger, which he may very well do, but there is a limit. So how could you bypass that? What's a good way to do that? Well, again, we're talking the 1950s here. Nuclear power is all the rage. We were looking at it for everything from power plants to airplanes to military ships and submarines, which they did. Ford even designed a car called the Nucleon that was going to have a fission reactor in the trunk. You only had to fuel it once every 10 years. Would have been a shame if something went wrong in the neighborhood, but anyway. So in the 40s and 50s, they sold us on rockets like these. Some are chemical powered, some are nuclear. They're all very cool looking. What they have in common is that they're big, they have a lot of cabin space for the crew and passengers and cargo and little tiny engines and not a lot of room left over for nuclear fuel, or for chemical fuel, which is really how we want to do it if we're going to fly to space a lot, but nobody's figured that out yet. Some of you may recognize this. This is from Destination Moon, one of our favorite movies. But this was what rockets were supposed to look like. And they promised us this, right? A nice big bridge where everybody could walk around and chat and do their things, and comely young maidens in their Velcro mini skirts could come over and hand a clipboard to the captain, which he'd sign and nod at them meaningfully and all this kind of thing. It was supposed to be like Star Trek. Don't get hung up on the gravity. You just push a gravity button in that universe. But we didn't get this kind of spaceship. What we got was more like this. This is the Apollo capsule. Imagine sitting in there for 2 weeks. Now, they never did it that long. They did 2 weeks in Gemini, which was 2 guys and much smaller. So you had 2 astronauts sitting in the Gemini capsule 2 weeks, shoulders touching, with about this much clearance between their helmet and the hatch. And you can't open it because of the vacuum out there, so no thank you. So what we want is a bigger, more robust environment that can go places faster and carry more stuff. That's the whole point of having big rockets. So we could have had this, that's Leslie Nielsen, by the way, if we had done this, which is Project Orion. This was also late 1950s. General Atomics, a company down in San Diego, was looking at some old studies that had been done a few years before and said, hey, you know, we got a lot of nuclear bombs sitting around this country. We could use those for propulsion. And one of the other engineers said, surely you mean a nuclear reactor? And he said, no, bombs. Think about it. Each time they go off, they give a little bit of a push, right? Well, by gosh, they do. So they designed a number of versions of this spacecraft. This is one of the larger ones. This is the interplanetary version. They came all the way from small, medium, large, mega large to interstellar. I like this one because it looks like a big 50 caliber bullet. You see right there. That's the Orion spacecraft as proportion to the Statue of Liberty, so you can get an idea of the size. It's 170 feet tall. It weighed 22 million pounds at launch. Saturn V is the size of a destroyer, and it weighs 7.5 million. This weighs, 6.5 million. This weighs a lot more. But it had 4,000 times the thrust of the Saturn V, which is cool. It could carry 70 to 100 people, as far as you want to go, basically, until you run out of atomic bombs. Tons and tons of cargo. Basically, this was a one-shot expedition to just about anywhere in the solar system that's worth going. And it's still studied. It was studied up as recently as a couple years ago. And as of yet, no engineers have found a reason that it couldn't work. It would be challenging, but all the numbers and everything seems to add up to say that it would be possible. So the crew quarters is here. These are all atomic bombs. These are shock absorbers, because you don't want an atomic bomb going off down here and that bang being transmitted directly into you. So of course you have your shock absorbers here, pressure plate, and that little tube there is where the bombs would go out and go bang a couple hundred feet away from the bottom of it. And just for a sense of scale, that's an Apollo astronaut, so it gives you an idea of the size of this thing. It would have been sensational. Freeman Dyson was a part of this study. My favorite quote of his is Mars by 1965, Saturn by 1970. He wasn't kidding. He was dead serious about this. It would have probably been about the same cost or cheaper than the Apollo program. So what do you suppose the problem was? Well, lifting off from Earth with atomic bombs is kind of a non-starter now, isn't it? So it was a great program. with a really sound engineering logic behind it, but taking off from the ground using nuclear weapons is not necessarily the best way to go. Dyson calculated it would have only added about 1% to the fallout in the atmosphere, given how much nuclear testing was going on at that time. Most of us breathed some of it at one time or another if we're of a certain age. And he said there would probably only be 1 or 2 deaths per launch on average in the public, which sounds kind of bad until you realize that 36,400 people were dying every year in their Corvairs and their Buicks and whatever other large American monstrosities they were driving at the time. So, you know, in terms of raw numbers, the price isn't too high. Morally, it's a little shifty, so this was also a non-starter, which is a shame because it could have been really neat. Preferably if they had launched it with chemical rockets and gone nuclear once it got to orbit. They did test it with conventional explosives just to make sure the idea would work, so I thought I'd show a little bit of that. This was called the putt-putt. It's about 3 feet across, and it's just setting off TNT as it goes up, but it shows that it works.